Welcome to part 3 of the Demystifying Strategic Planning course of the Nonprofit Bootcamp e-learning series. Our presenter today is Tamara Jones. She is the president and CEO of Evident Impact and is the executive director of the Southeastern African American Farmers Organic Network. Tamara brings more than 17 years of experience providing strategic leadership, organizational administration, program management, and team development. Her skill at leading organizations through effective planning and implementation resulted in her being honored as a 2011 White House Champion of Change. Jones specializes in leading organizations through robust and impactful planning, evaluation, and program management in order to help them achieve their strategic goals. She has extensive experience in the government and nonprofit sectors and has an unrelenting passion to better the world through service to social impact organizations. Her professional life is marked by her leading programs to accomplish more than what was expected of them, and she is committed to helping more organizations to do the same. Tamara, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and expertise with us. Please take it away.
Thank you, Susan. Welcome, everyone. Good to have everyone back for this last module in our strategic planning series. And today we're going to be focusing on monitoring and evaluation. But before we dive in, let's do a quick recap of what we've covered in the last 2 modules. And if you weren't able to join us, then I would encourage you to go back and listen to the taped presentations. But we discussed that a strategic plan is best regarded as a communications document, slightly different from strategic planning, which is a management process designed to foster strategic thinking, decision-making, and strategic action in your organization. So again, the end goal is not to produce a strategic plan document. That's really just the start. The idea is to then use that document in ways that can transform and drive more strategic engagement throughout our organization and teams. And that ideally what we want is to move away from a compliance approach to strategic planning, where we're just checking the boxes against what we said we would do. Did we do it or not? Yes, no. And adopt what we're calling a learning approach, where we follow up on the work as we're carrying it out, as laid out in our strategic plan, but trying to answer the question of why we're seeing the results we're seeing is much more important than what we're doing, describing what we're doing. The why is at the heart of the strategic project, if you will. And with that approach, a learning approach, we understand that the strategies that we're carrying out, the projects, the campaigns, the initiatives, the programs, it's best if we regard them as hypotheses that we're making. In other words, they represent our best assumptions about what we think will work in the future, maybe based on our past experience or based on studies, reports, or data. But if we look at our programs and projects as hypotheses, then we're really adopting a relationship to them where we're trying to understand why they're working the way that they are. And also a learning approach allows us to be more adaptive and responsive to changes. Things invariably come up that are not expected, and adopting this approach allows us to be a little bit more resilient, hopefully, in adapting to those changes and not just checking off, well, we weren't able to get it done. So again, reminding us that the true purpose of engaging in strategic planning is not just communications or being able to write a report to your board or your funder. It's to transform and build your organizations, and hopefully to build more resilient organizations and programs so that they can have meaningful impact. And in our second webinar, we explored a kind of simple template that I've developed and am making available to participants in the program to drive kind of a lot more consistent and high quality, cohesive content in our strategic plans. So today what we want to do is use our 30 minutes to, again, get a very high-level best practice approach to monitoring and evaluation. By the end of the session, you'll understand the definition of monitoring and evaluation and the differences between the two. We'll highlight some of the best practices to monitoring and evaluation. And again, I'm going to introduce you to two very simple but effective templates that you can use to drive the monitoring process, and that links back to what's in our strategic plan. So let's start with definitions. So monitoring is any process that we use to systematically collect data so that we can assess our progress towards goals and objectives, results that we've pre-identified. That's different from evaluation, which is the systematic and objective assessment of whether our programs or policies or activities are efficient and effective in achieving the results that we want. The way that I often like to think about this is the difference between, I'm going to go back here, you know, you can go out to the drugstore and right now and buy a blood pressure monitor. And every day you can take a reading of your blood pressure. And you might be able to see days when it's high and low, and it might get you to adjust some of your daily behaviors to keep it in range. But monitoring your blood pressure every day is not going to tell you if you've got heart disease. It's not going to tell you if you have hypertension. It's not going to tell you if you have kidney disease, or if you're just somebody that runs a little high or a little low, right? So monitoring tells you some information, but it really doesn't get to the root of what might be driving the results that you're seeing. So that might be a good way to distinguish between the two. So when we talk about M&E, monitoring and evaluation, you'll often see them linked together. We're talking about this combined process of using both of these tools to improve performance and achieve results. So the goal is always, how can we more consistently improve how we're managing our programs or organizations today and in the future so that we can have more meaningful impact. And monitoring and evaluation is at the very heart of the learning approach that we talked about in our first module. It's the process by which we generate questions which are going to lead to a deeper understanding of our programs and the clients that we're looking to serve, the stakeholders with which we're engaging them, and how best to make adjustments so that we can be better of service to them. I'm not going to talk today about data gathering tools. So, you know, you're monitoring and evaluating, you're looking at data, and there's tons of different tools and processes for gathering data, from surveys to focus groups, interviews, your financial analyses. You know, it's really up to you to make sense of which tools and methods are best aligned for your organization and the programs that you're running. So let me very quickly kind of touch on some of the best practices to keep in mind when you're thinking about monitoring and evaluation. You want, you know, the most effective M&E plans are going to be used to support setting the right priorities in your organization. If your monitoring and evaluation is not helping you to basically decide what to say no to, or is helping you make decisions around your programs or your organizational activities, then you might want to take a fresh look, because really it's one of the most powerful benefits of how and why we do this work. You want to engage in monitoring and evaluation that is evidence-based. We have a tendency in nonprofits, particularly smaller ones, well, we all do it, quite frankly, in our organizations. There's a bias towards anecdotal and information and what we think is common sense and should work. And we really want to push beyond that and look at what the data, look at what the evidence says. And the evidence can be quantitative or qualitative, but again, we want to be pulling that in some systematic way. We want to draw on data from a variety of sources. So, whenever you find that you're basing your evaluation or monitoring practices on stories that your staff is telling, or just your own internal survey or one survey, that's a good start, but it's not as strong as if you've got multiple ways in which you're trying to map what's happening within your programs. You want your monitoring and evaluation plans to be linked to your strategic plans and your work plans. And the template I'm going to show you, I think, offers you a very robust way of doing that. The purpose is that we're trying to always drive our effectiveness. We want to be more impactful in carrying out our mission, and we want to be more efficient, meaning we're getting the most out of every unit of resource, time, dollars that we're spending. Ideally, it should be participatory in the sense of it's not just up to an outside consultant to come in and evaluate in silo. You want to be bringing in as many of the folks doing the work in your organization. They all have important information to contribute to our understanding of what's working and what's not. If we do it right, we can communicate much more effectively what's happening in our program. And at the end of the day, monitoring and evaluation should be easy in the sense that it needs to be scaled to your organization, to the size of your organization, the culture of your organization. What's going to work for some corporate nonprofit is not necessarily going to work for a grassroots limited resource organization. So we need to find something that's going to work given your culture and your level of resources. What we need to understand is that monitoring and evaluation is your friend. It's not a burden that's being imposed by a grantor, just something, again, we have to do to please the board or please some external stakeholder. This is really a tool that you can use to transform your teams, transform your organization, manage your programs much more effectively. Because at the end of the day, as leaders, it's not enough for us to communicate what we do. We have to be able to answer the question about why does it work or doesn't work. We have the why is at the heart of how we engage folks in our project. So this is a critical aspect of our work. So Jeff, if we could jump now to the template. Last time we walked through several of the worksheets in this planning template, which we're making available to you. Some of you I know requested and got the early version, but we're going to need to send you out this updated version because today at the end, you'll see I added 2 new worksheets, dashboards, one for quarterly and one for monthly. So let's take a quick look at those. Okay, here we go. So again, this workbook is designed so that as you fill out the earlier worksheets, it pulls in your answers into the subsequent worksheets. So we don't have to be cutting and pasting and increasing the probability of errors. And so if you need to go back and change something, if you need to change a goal, then you go back to the goal worksheet. And once you edit what's on that worksheet, it will automatically change throughout the rest of the workbook. So hopefully that makes it easier to work with. So we're going to continue looking at the examples that we built on last week. So here we're looking at the quarterly dashboard. I find that a simple red, yellow, green dashboard, it can be a really powerful tool. Doesn't have to be something complicated. The simpler the better, actually, in answering the question, how are we doing? At the level of your board, it is sufficient for them to be looking at a report of how you're doing on a quarterly basis. And they really need to be focused on how you're doing in making progress towards your objectives. Typically, your board should not be engaged in reviewing progress on your strategies, unless they're a working board and helping to staff your organization, because really it's a level of not micromanagement, but it's kind of getting into the weeds, and they're empowering your executive director and your teams to kind of carry it out at that level. What they're holding you organization accountable to is the objectives, because the objectives is what defines the results that the organization wants to achieve over the planning period, and that's going to move everything forward. So in this example, we have a long-term goal to have a financially stable organization. We have 3 objectives. So within a 3-year period, we want to increase our annual operating budget from $500,000 to $1 million. We said, okay, we're not going to get there overnight. So at the end of the first year, we want to be at $600,000. And then this organization broke it up and said, well, by the end of the first quarter, we want to have brought in $150,000. And you can see, using a red, yellow, green approach, that they're on track. So we can see their current status is green. And then they've got a comment box. Just real quickly, tell the board or whoever else what they need to know about why you were able to get there, right? And so they said, well, board members are meeting their assigned goals for scheduling time with major donors, and that's producing firm commitments from major donors. The organization has also doubled the number of the grant applications that they've submitted, and membership dues is also up 25% over last year. Great. So now we can see at a glance we're on track towards this particular objective, and the board understands the primary reasons why. The second objective, we want to have a rainy day fund of equal to 3 months of operating expenses. By the end of the first year, we want to have at least 1 month of reserve equal to $20,000. We set a goal to put aside $5,000 by the end of this quarter, and there we go. And unfortunately, we're in the red. Well, why? Why were we not able to meet this goal? Well, we have unplanned expenditures related to hiring a contractor. I see there's some spelling errors. Forgive me here. Related to hiring a contractor to cover for a staff member who had to take extended sick leave. Okay, so now we understand, right? We brought in more money, but our expenses went up in a way that we didn't plan, so we couldn't save any of that money. All right. The last example here, we want to diversify our revenue. So we have a 3-year objective of having 40% or more of our annual revenue coming from unrestricted sources. Year 1, we'd like to get at least 20% of our revenue from unrestricted sources. That's $120,000. And at the end of the first quarter, we'd like to have $20,000 from unrestricted revenue. How are we doing? Well, we're kind of yellow. We didn't quite hit the mark, but we didn't fall too far short, so we're going to keep an eye on it. We actually got 15,000 instead of 20,000 from unrestricted sources. Why? Well, most of that was coming from the sale of products, t-shirts, and the sales were lower because the Spring Festival was rained out. So less people showed up, we made less sales. So, again, you can see how this gives you a very quick and concise way of zeroing in on performance against the strategic objectives in our strategic plan. This, again, is great for the board. You can use this with your teams, but I want to show you now a slightly more detailed dashboard that I'm going to suggest that you use for your work teams, whether these are your staff teams, your volunteer teams, or maybe even some of your board committees. I'm going to talk in terms of a staff, just for simplicity's sake. So when you're talking about the folks that are actually going to be driving the strategies, carrying out the programs, the projects, the initiatives. Really, what I found as best practice is that you're not waiting, every 3 months, every quarter, or every 6 months to look at how those things are going. You need to be paying close and ongoing attention, because if things aren't working out with your programs, your projects, your initiatives, you need to catch that early. Because remember, with strategies, you can change your strategies. When it comes to what's in your strategic plan, your goals and your objectives really shouldn't be changing a whole lot. If you've got a 3-year strategic plan, your objectives might get tweaked at the end of the year a little bit, but you shouldn't be changing your objectives, a lot during that period. But the work that you're going to do to try to accomplish those objectives, that work can change. So your programs might change because they're not working, and you might want to try something different. So we need to be looking at that a little bit more frequently. The suggestion is that you should be looking at that at least monthly, particularly if this is new for your organization. When you get more comfortable, sometimes folks look at this every 2 months. Let's take a look at how this looks a little different from the quarterly dashboard. So again, we're starting with our first objective, which is increasing our annual budget from $500,000 to $1 million. And you can see now that we've identified 5 strategies of how we're going to accomplish that, right? We're going to hire a fundraising consultant for a major donor campaign. We're going to do a black tie gala to raise $200,000. We're going to increase our membership dues campaign to try to hit $100,000. We're going to hire a professional grant writer to try to get to $350,000 in grants, and we're going to do a robust board fundraising training and coaching program. For each of these strategies, we want to identify a single individual who is responsible for ensuring that that strategy is carried out. They may not be the ones actually doing the work, but they're the ones responsible for checking in with the folks doing the work to make sure it keeps moving. I cannot stress enough that this should be an individual. There's a tendency to want to have groups or peers, but really you can really only hold one person responsible. So we identify the name or the job title that will drive the strategy. And then you'll see, because they did planning, they were able to identify the deliverables that we're going to produce for this month. So for hiring a fundraising consultant, this month we hoped to have written and posted an RFP, a request for a proposal, to job boards so that we could get responses from consultants. And how did we do? Well, we're in the red. Didn't work out. Why? Well, the executive director was on sick leave for 3 weeks and didn't delegate that work for someone else to complete. Okay, so now we understand why that didn't get done. What are we going to do next month? We're going to push it forward. We're going to write and post the RFP to job boards. And so, well, let me give another example here. So the second would be the black tie gala. Again, driven by the executive director. What was the deliverable this month? To hire an event planner. Hey, we're in the green. We actually signed a contract with an event planning company. Great. So what are we going to do next month? Well, we're going to complete an event planning calendar and sign a contract for the venue. Again, very simple way of not only tracking how well we're moving the work forward, but can be a very good accountability tool, not just for individuals, but for the team as a whole. And so one of the ways that we've seen using these dashboards for staff teams is if you have this in SharePoint or say in Google Sheets, then if you filled out the names of the strategy leaders, folks can go into the document and they complete the row for their name. So you don't have to have every month the executive director or the program director running around collecting reports, copying and pasting, putting everything into one document. we really want to share that work with everyone who's doing it. And with the technology today, there's no reason why folks can't go into a single document and update the content in a way that then works with a deadline that you impose, and it makes the reporting process much easier. And then when you bring folks together now for a staff meeting or a team meeting, everyone can look at the report card, and everyone can see how we're doing, and we're breaking down the silos, right? Where folks often, when we're in organizations, we work on what we've been assigned, and a lot of times we don't really know how the person sitting at the next desk, how they're doing, unless it's directly tied to my tasks. Well, now when we come together, we can see how the team as a whole is doing. One of the things that I think is also very powerful about this is that you can now use this to engage the team as a brain trust. Right? So now everybody can talk about, wow, why is this red? Do we really understand and hearing from each other where they might be running into problems, asking the team to kind of collectively think through and problem solve if there are challenge areas, and also celebrating collectively. I think I mentioned last time, maybe I didn't, I have one client where when the team hits all of their, and I think they agreed to 80% or more of their report is green, then she treats the entire team. They'll take a Friday afternoon off and go to a movie together or go to the park. The team decides. But now we tied into a performance management system in our organization that reflects what we say we want, which are empowered teams and not just empowered individuals working in silos. Okay, great. Jeff, if we could skip back over to the PowerPoint. Thank you. All right, whoops. There we go. All right, so in closing, let me say that it can seem like a lot of work. We've all got a lot on our plates, and so the notion of, wow, it's enough work doing the strategic plan, and now we're going to put together a process and a template that we're going to come together once a month to use, and it's easy to think, well, do we really need to do this work? Especially if things seem to be going more or less okay. And what I want to really encourage everyone in this, sound of my voice is to really get in the habit of paying attention to what your program data is telling you, so that we can move away from always reacting to crises to positioning ourselves to being more intentional and even forecasting a little bit what's coming. Too often we spend so much of our time putting out fires, and some of those fires we should have seen coming, but we can't unless we create the systems, the monitoring systems, to allow us to see the smoke signals. And so this can be a powerful way for those of you looking to manage and drive programs and organizations. And I do hope that you will take this approach, whether it's my template or one that you develop on your own, to help bring your teams together and to connect their everyday work to what the vision that we articulate in our strategic plans. With that, I thank you for your time.